When a sitting congressman begins reading out names of billionaires, royals, and CEOs connected to Jeffrey Epstein on the record during a live hearing and the FBI director freezes, you know something's off. That silence wasn't hesitation. It was control. Because when truth starts creeping toward the powerful, the system's first instinct is to protect itself. What you're about to hear isn't a hearing, it's a window into how far the government will go to keep certain names buried. Representative Thomas Massie didn't flinch. He listed over 20 men tied to Epstein straight from the FBI's own files. Victims, he said, had identified them directly: bankers, producers, politicians, a royal prince, a billionaire from Canada, even a magician. It was the kind of moment that should have made headlines everywhere.
The second document is entitled "What Epstein's Bodyguard Warned About His CIA Connections." The third document is from Fox Digital. It's titled "Epstein's Private Calendar Reveals Planned Meetings with Obama Admin Official, CIA Chief." And the last document is Wall Street Journal article that highlights Ehud Barak's 36 meetings with Jeffrey Epstein. He was the former Prime Minister of Israel and head of military intelligence for Israel. It may have held that title when he met Epstein, and then, yes.
Without objection, the gentleman will hold for a second. The gentleman from Maryland is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Just one UC request. This is Judge Engelmeyer's decision from August in U.S. versus Epstein, stating the government's 100,000 pages of Epstein files dwarfs the 70-odd pages of Epstein grand jury materials.
Without objection, the gentleman from Kentucky is recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Director Patel, I watched some of your Senate hearing yesterday when Senator Kennedy asked you, you've seen most of the files, who, if anyone, did Epstein traffic these women to besides himself? You replied, according to the transcript, there is no credible information that he trafficked them to anyone else. You also said somewhere in the hearing and here today that the problem is that the case files are constrained by limited search warrants from 2006 to 2007, and that the non-prosecution agreement hamstrung future investigations. Those constraints only apply to the Southern District of Florida. They do not apply to Southern District of New York, the location of the 2019 sex trafficking indictment, which produced many things, including a series of FD 302 documents. According to victims who cooperated with the FBI in that investigation, these documents in FBI possession, your possession, detail at least 20 men, including Mr. Jess Staley, CEO of Barclays Bank, who Jeffrey Epstein trafficked victims to, victims including minors such as Virginia Roberts Giuffre, may she rest in peace. That list also includes at least 19 other individuals, one Hollywood producer worth a few $100 million, one royal prince, one high-profile individual in the music industry, one very prominent banker, one high-profile government official, one high-profile former politician, one owner of a car company in Italy, one rock star, one magician, at least 6 billionaires, including a billionaire from Canada. We know these people exist in the FBI files, the files that you control. I don't know exactly who they are, but the FBI does. Have you launched any investigations into any of these people, and have you seen these 302 documents?
Sir, I have asked my FBI agents to review the entirety of the Epstein files and bring forth any credible information, and we're working with Congress not only to divulge that information and produce it to you, but any investigations that arise from any credible investigation will be brought. There have been no new materials brought to me launching a new indictment.
So is the loophole here, or is it your assertion that these victims aren't credible, that the 302s maybe didn't produce credible statements that rise to a probable cause?
It's not my assertion, sir. It's the assertion of 2 different United States attorneys' offices from 3 separate administrations who investigated those same materials in lifetime.
Are the 302 documents in the FBI's possession?
They reviewed all that, yes, sir.
And so have you reviewed those 302 documents where the victims name the people who victimized them?
If I personally know, but the FBI has.
So how can you sit here and in front of the Senate and say there are no names?
I said
I named one today.
I said We are not in the practice at the Department of Justice FBI of releasing victims' names. That is not what we do. We are also not in the habit of releasing incredible information. That's not what we do. But multiple authorities have looked at the entirety of what we have.
Okay, I got to move on here. Were you present when the AG had the White House event when she released the binders to the social media influencers?
I was, yes.
So if you're willing to meet with social media influencers who stood to benefit from the sensational and sad stories of these victims, will you meet with the victims as well?
The FBI will meet with anyone who has new information.
Will you personally meet with them?
The FBI and the professionals who are handling the cases will.
Were you instructed that it was important to release the documents to the Oversight Committee on the day of my introduction of the discharge petition to release these files?
I don't know what day that was, so no.
Well, they were released that day, and there were victims' names who weren't redacted because they were in such a rush, and the victims are not happy about that. Have you investigated any of the CIA connections? Have you seen the CIA file on Jeffrey Epstein? And if you wanted to see it, would they show it to you?
Well, I can speak for the FBI, and that's presuming there's a CIA case file. And I've reviewed everything that the interagency, not I, the FBI, that was provided to us.
Would you be willing to look at the CIA file on Jeffrey Epstein?
If there is such a file, and if it has not already been turned over to the FBI will look at any new investigative leads.
Have you made any progress on the pipe bomb investigation January 6th? And have you made any progress on the motive of the Las Vegas shooter?
As to the first, it's an ongoing investigation, and we have made progress. As to the second, sir, I'll have to get back to you.
But instead the room fell into that strange silence, the kind that only happens when truth hits too close to power. And at the center of it all sat Director Patel, expression locked, deflecting every question with the precision of a man who knew exactly how much not to say. Patel was pressed, "Have you seen these files? Have you investigated these men?" His response, "No credible information." He said it so flatly, it almost sounded rehearsed. But here's the problem, those weren't rumors Massie cited. They were FBI 302 documents, first-hand victim interviews recorded and archived. The same files the Bureau has controlled for years. The same ones the public has never seen. So if the victims' statements exist, and the Bureau holds them, why does the director claim there's no credible evidence? It's because credibility isn't decided by truth, it's decided by who has the power to label it. For decades, that's how the Epstein story has survived, through selective blindness. Everyone saw what was happening, but no one with authority wanted to actually see it. The first Epstein deal back in 2008 wasn't a plea bargain, it was a protection plan. And what we witnessed in this hearing was that protection still at work, only this time under oath. Massie kept pushing, "So have you personally read those 302 documents, the ones naming powerful men?" Patel hesitated, then said, "I have not personally, but the FBI has." That single sentence says everything. He hasn't read them, but somehow he knows there's no credible evidence. It's the perfect bureaucratic circle, no one's accountable, everyone's informed, and the truth stays sealed behind layers of red tape. But what's buried in those files? Let's look at what we do know. Victims told investigators about at least 20 men Epstein trafficked them to. Among them, a Hollywood producer worth hundreds of millions, a royal prince, a government official, a rock star, 6 billionaires, one Italian car magnate. And yet somehow the public's been told there's not enough evidence to investigate even one of them. These aren't ghost stories, they're sworn statements sitting in FBI possession, locked behind ongoing investigations that never seem to go anywhere. This is the same playbook used for years: delay, redact, dismiss. And the most chilling part is how familiar it's become. Epstein's operation wasn't just about exploitation, it was about access. He traded information the way others trade money. When those files threaten to reveal who benefited from that access, suddenly every agency forgets how to read. At one point, Massie asked Patel a simple question: "Would you look at the CIA's file on Epstein?" Patel's answer was almost laughable: "If there is such a file." As if the question was hypothetical. But months earlier, public reports had already surfaced showing Epstein met with intelligence-linked officials including a CIA chief and foreign leaders. Even former Labor Secretary Alex Acosta once admitted he was told Epstein belonged to intelligence and to leave it alone. That's not rumor, that's on record. So why the hesitation to even acknowledge it? Because the deeper this story goes, the clearer it becomes that Epstein wasn't just one man operating in the shadows. He was part of something much bigger, something built on secrecy, leverage, and silence. He was a gatekeeper to the kind of power no courtroom can touch. And in that hearing, you could see the fear of what happens when those gates start creaking open. When Massie mentioned Virginia Roberts Giuffre, one of Epstein's most vocal survivors, he did so with respect, ending his statement with, "May she rest in peace." But even her truth, which helped bring Epstein's operation into the light, remains buried in classified pages. Her story is one of countless others, voices that screamed for justice and were met with paperwork. Every survivor's account is a document, every document a file, every file a secret. And that's how the cycle continues. But it wasn't just about the names, it was about the disconnect, the coldness with which Patel deflected the very idea of meeting with victims. When asked if he'd meet them personally, he said, "The FBI will meet with anyone who has new information." That's not empathy. That's protocol. Victims don't want to be processed, they want to be heard. And in that room, you could feel how the institution had drained the humanity out of its own mission. This is where the hearing turned from interrogation to exposure. Massie called out the hypocrisy directly, how the same officials who met with influencers to push awareness online couldn't find the time to meet the victims themselves, how names were unredacted in the rush to release documents, yet the people responsible for protecting those victims still faced no consequences. It was a rare moment when political theater collided with something raw, real, and uncomfortable, the possibility that entire agencies have been protecting not just Epstein's secrets but their own. The FBI's defense has always been, "We've already investigated this." But think about what that really means. The same agencies that failed Epstein's victims in real time now claim to have reviewed their own failures and cleared themselves. Multiple U.S. attorneys, Patel said, from 3 administrations looked at the same materials and found nothing new. It sounds official, it sounds thorough, but it's the ultimate escape hatch, because when everyone's responsible, no one is. This pattern repeats in every corner of the Epstein story, just enough transparency to say, "We've done our part," but never enough to let the truth breathe. Even after Epstein's arrest in 2019, key files were sealed, others redacted beyond meaning. When the press asked why, officials said it was to protect ongoing cases, but years later, those cases never surfaced. It's a method, not a mistake. A system built to appear accountable while staying completely untouchable, and that's why Patel's words hit so hard, not because of what he said but what he refused to say. "We don't release victims' names," he reminded the committee, but no one asked for the victims' names. They asked for the predators, the men with power, wealth, and connections whose involvement could unravel entire networks of influence. That's what wasn't being answered, and that's what still isn't being answered. If this hearing proved anything, it's that truth doesn't get buried by lies, it gets buried by process, ongoing investigation, reviewed materials, no credible evidence. Those are the phrases that have replaced justice. They sound professional, but they serve one purpose: to delay accountability until people stop paying attention. It's the language of slow suffocation, truth drained out through polite denials and internal memos. But what happens when people stop accepting ongoing as an excuse? What happens when a congressman finally refuses to let it slide? You get moments like this where the system's mask slips, even for a second, and the public sees how deep the rot runs, because behind every redaction is a name, behind every sealed file is a choice, and behind every official who says we've seen no evidence, there's a reason they don't want to look. At the end of the hearing, the tension in the room said everything. The list had been read, the files were now part of the record, the silence was deafening, and the world once again was left to wonder who decides what justice looks like when the accused and the investigators belong to the same world. Maybe that's why this story refuses to fade. It's not just about Epstein anymore, it's about every person in power who benefited from his silence, and every institution still pretending not to know why. There's a moment in the exchange that perfectly sums up the whole problem. Massie asks Patel about the CIA file. Patel says, if there is such a file, that's not ignorance, it's choreography. Because even entertaining the idea opens doors that were welded shut decades ago. When an FBI director won't acknowledge whether intelligence agencies might have their own Epstein records, that's not transparency, that's containment. The less said, the less risk. And yet those walls are cracking. Every hearing, every leak, every unredacted line pulls another thread. Victims' advocates are demanding the release of full Epstein files. Lawmakers are calling for declassification of intelligence records. And the public, tired, skeptical, but more aware than ever, is starting to realize that the real story isn't just who Epstein was, but who he served. Massie ended his questioning by calling this confrontation exactly what it was, a test of accountability. What happens, he asked, when the people responsible for exposing the truth are the same ones hiding it? It's the question that lingers long after the cameras stop rolling, because the more you think about it, the harder it is to escape the answer. What happens when justice itself is treated like a secret, when investigations exist only to ensure no one gets too close to the truth? The Epstein case didn't just expose a man, it exposed a system built on silence. And every deflection, every no comment, every carefully crafted denial is another reminder of how fragile transparency really is. But this moment, this clash between Patel and Congress matters because it tore through the illusion. It showed the seams. It forced the public to see what accountability looks like when it's filtered through layers of power. And maybe, just maybe, it reminded people that real justice only happens when the truth stops asking for permission. So as the cameras faded and the official transcripts filed away, one thing remained clear: the names are real, the files exist, and the silence speaks louder than any denial ever could. If you believe power should never be immune to truth, don't let this story die in the noise. Stay curious, stay aware, because silence only wins when people stop listening. And if you want to keep digging into the stories they try hardest to bury, subscribe, like the video, and turn on notifications. Because what's coming next might finally reveal what they've worked this hard to hide.